Hello everyone, welcome again to General Psychology, Psychology 101, and today we're going to be talking about vision and visual perception. So when we talk about sensation and perception, vision is probably the first sense that comes to mind. We use our eyes all the time, we're constantly looking at things. For humans, vision is our most developed sense. There are a couple of characteristics of vision that are extremely important to consider when thinking about psychology. So when we look at things, our eyes transduce or transform light energy into neural messages, and these are then sent to our brain for processing. And the amount of light that we see as humans is just a thin slice of the whole spectrum of light waves or electromagnetic energy that exists in the world. And we do perceive color, for example, as electromagnetic energy. So the colors that we can see as humans fall within that small spectrum of electromagnetic energy. And there are two important characteristics of light waves. So we have wavelength and amplitude. Wavelength is the distance from one wave peak to the next, so from there to there. That determines the hue or color of light that we see. And amplitude is the wavelength's height and determines the brightness or intensity of light that we see. Now I could get into a lot more detail about the biology of light, the chemistry of light, and the biology of our visual receptors, our eyes, but I just want to get you a basic understanding of the different parts of the eye. So we have our eye, light enters the cornea, passes through the pupil, goes through the lens, which helps to focus light onto our retina, which is kind of in the back of our eye. The images that we see are reflected through the lens to the point where the image on the back of our retina is actually inverted, it's upside down. And our brain receives all this information and then kind of puts it back upright, puts it back together. The receptor cells that we have on our retina are known as cones and rods. Cones are near the area of central focus, so where the image is actually being presented on the back of our eye. Rods are in that area as well, but also in the more peripheral areas. Cones are great for perceiving colors. Rods are great for understanding things in dim light. These go through bipolar cells, through ganglion cells, and form the optic nerve, which then travels all the way into the brain and gives all that information to the brain. That optic nerve, the place where these things kind of come together and then leave the eye, creates a blind spot. But again, our brain is great at filling in the blanks, so it fills in that blind spot area with what we think should be there. So what does our brain do with this information? Well, we have specific areas or regions of our brain, especially within our visual cortex here in the back, that helps us detect certain features of objects or stimuli. We have specific areas that detect specific aspects or specific qualities of an object, and we can actually use fMRIs to see, all right, what areas of the visual cortex are activated, and we can use that information to basically determine, all right, we now know what this person is looking at based on what areas of the brain are activated. So specific features such as shape, angle, movement are each tied to different aspects or different areas of the brain. We can also process different characteristics or qualities of a stimulus simultaneously. This is what's known as parallel processing. So we have an object, we're looking at the color of the object, the form, the motion, the depth of it. And then our brain is able to use all this information at the same time to integrate it into one concept. Additionally, we see a really interesting phenomenon known as blind sight occur. That's when individuals are maybe not able to explicitly perceive a stimulus, but they still have intuitions related to the object and are still able to respond to it. So people might not be able to actually visually see a box in front of them, but because they're able to sense it in some other way, they actually are able to interact with this box. So people are able to see through the brain, but not actually see through their eyes. What about color? So color is one of these characteristics that we're processing when we're looking at a stimulus. And one interesting thing about color is that the objects that we see are not this color, but we're actually perceiving the wavelengths of light that are reflecting off of the object. So in a sense, the objects that we see are everything but that color because they're reflecting that type of wavelength off of it. these wavelengths are interpreted to be this specific color. So what I might see as red is highly unlikely that anyone else is seeing the exact same thing as red. We each have our different interpretation or understanding of what the color red means or what the color red looks like. But we are very adept at determining slight variations in colors. We can discriminate between 1 million at least different color variations. But this doesn't happen to everyone. We do see that some individuals are color deficient, color blind, and we see that this is more likely for men than women because this is due to how genetics are working. It's more predisposed to occur in men due to it being on that specific chromosome compared to women. So what are some theories about how we perceive color? Well, the Young-Helmholtz trichromatic theory suggests that we have specific receptors in the retina that are tuned to 3 specific colors, that is red, green, and blue, and that we can create every color in the spectrum or in the hue by combining these colors in some way, shape, or form. Alternatively, a different theory focuses on the fact that we have specific pairings of colors or opponent retinal processes that enable color vision. So this opponent process theory says that specific color pairings such as red-green, blue-yellow, or blue-orange sometimes, and black and white, that these pairings then combine with the other colors, other pairings that exist, but you can't combine the 2 colors associated with each pairing. So you can't combine red and green to form a color. You can't combine yellow and blue to form a color. And oddly enough, these are some of the pairings that a lot of colorblind people can't distinguish between. We see that red-green colorblindness is probably one of the most common forms of colorblindness where individuals cannot distinguish between those 2 colors. And both theories are somewhat correct. We do see that, yes, we have receptors in the eye, these red, green, and blue receptors that initiates how we perceive color, how we sense color. But then those signals are processed through opponent process cells in the brain that allow us to determine exactly what color it is that we're perceiving. We can also organize what it is that we're seeing. So we often group clusters of sensations into a larger grouping, a larger understanding, or what's known as a gestalt, a larger whole. And oftentimes we find that the brain tends to fill in the gaps. So just like the brain fills in the gaps with our blind spot due to the optic nerve, our brain often fills in the gaps of sensation with certain perceptions. So we might see a cube where there's actually just simple blue dots with white lines in them. More often than not, our brain does a good job of putting things together and forming patterns in the world that help us navigate our environment. So what are the different things that different aspects of objects, stimuli, environments that we're perceiving when we look at something? Well, we can focus on form. So one aspect of form perception is figure, ground, contrast. We separate objects from their environments. We can see that they are separate from what's happening in the background. We can also organize stimuli into coherent groups, whether that be by proximity, so we might group things that are just simply close to each other. We might group things that form a continuous line or pattern. And we might group things together that bring closure to something, so similar to the cube box that I have on one of the slides. We can perceive depth, so how far away someone is from us. The fact that we have 2 eyes is extremely helpful for us perceiving depth. Each eye has a slightly different image of the world, and we use those 2 separate images to better understand how far away something is from us. The visual cliff is a great example of how we understand depth. So from a young age, we find that infants are hesitant to crawl along an invisible floor if it looks like there's a big visual drop. So this helps to demonstrate that our visual cues, our depth perception, is somewhat innate, that it's there from birth, and it helps us be wary of heights, helps prevent us from walking off cliffs, which is obviously a great skill to have. Motion perception helps us understand how stimuli objects move about the environment. We generally have the idea that things that are shrinking are probably moving away from us, and things that are getting bigger are probably moving towards us. And we also have the idea that large objects are moving slower than a smaller object moving at the same speed. Also, we have perceptual constancy. It's the idea that we have the understanding that objects, especially stimuli, are unchanging, that they stay the same no matter what the situation. This can sometimes be put to the test depending on context, which we've already mentioned, where sometimes it appears that a stimulus is different in a different context, even though we know, our brain has the understanding that the stimulus is exactly the same as it was in a different context. And lastly, similar to what I was talking about with the visual cliffs, certain aspects of vision are innate, that they are there when we are born. But some are learned. And we, as humans, do a pretty good job of adapting to our environments. Yes, there does appear to be a critical period for learning some of these visual cues and visual skills. But for the most part, we are able to adapt to our environments if that means adapting to a completely different way of seeing things visually. So when we get a new pair of glasses, this is altering our vision dramatically. But after maybe a few days, maybe a week, we start to not notice the difference in vision compared to how it was a week ago. A researcher had a helmet on that basically artificially inverted their visual field. So once they put this helmet on, the sky was down and the ground was up. And they had to somehow figure out how to move around and live their lives with this completely wonky and inverted visual field. It was extremely difficult for this individual at first, but after a week or two, the researcher, the person, was able to perform daily life, make a cup of coffee, eat food, walk somewhere. All of this was easy to do after a week. So we're really good at adapting to changes in our senses, especially in our visual cues. So that's all I have today. Thank you for your time and attention, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.